Welcome to the Dialogos podcast. I'm Cameron Hicks. I'm a Master's of Social Work student at Cal State San Marcos. And in this podcast, I'm hoping to reach out and have conversations with mental health professionals in my field or related fields that are interested in talking about and sparking dialogue in different worldviews, in different ways to understand connection to ourselves, connection to reality, and connection to others around us. I could think of no one better to start this group of conversations off with than Josh Roberts. Josh is a South African native who came to America, who has a history in psychology and theology. He's also someone who has lived experience with bipolar 1 disorder. He is the creator of Inspired Mind Mental Health and Neurodiversity Gifts. He'll go into a little bit more about what he does, but to give you an overview, he's helping us try to think differently about how it is we approach, theorize about mania, psychosis, and neurodiversity in general, helping us understand that maybe our scientific materialist reductionist worldview that we've been given isn't the whole story. And maybe by tapping into other wisdom traditions and lived experience of our own, we can understand other aspects to reality that can enrich in it, give us more meaning, more purpose, more connection. He hosts workshops, events, and groups where he takes people through a journey, a hero's journey, and how we can take the current worldview we exist in and go through a tradition around the world, or go through a journey around the world, looking at different traditions and seeing how those can enrich our worldview and help us see things a little bit differently. If you're interested in this, I hope this podcast illuminates more of those ideas. Josh is a beautiful, colorful personality with lots to offer, lots of insight. And I hope this is the first conversation of many. So enjoy, and thank you for your time and attention. All right. Welcome, Josh.
Oh, man. This is awesome. I've been looking forward to this.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Me too. Yeah, I'm super excited. Okay, so to start, I want you to just introduce yourself. I think it's going to be what's best. And do that however you want. We can unpack it. But I want to hear two things. I mean, you have an amazing lived experience that has informed what you do now in your work. And then you can talk about the work, what it is you do.
Sweet.
And then we'll land more on that and unpack the amazing curriculum you've developed as now part of NAMI's work and integrated in different mental health organizations over San Diego County.
Yeah.
So we'll unpack all that, but I want you to start with just your experience and what got you here.
Man, boats and planes and trains and cars, they got me to America because I wasn't born here. I was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa. It was a sunny day in 1984 and the birds were chirping, and that's where the journey started, man. But if I go into all the detail, it would be way too long. But South Africa is a wild place. There's a wildness. The system doesn't exactly work, and so people don't necessarily trust the government or that the phone booths are going to work or that like authorities necessarily have it all figured out. And so having been raised in that culture, we kind of had to learn to think for ourselves a little bit. And so it gave us an eclectic worldview. There's 11 official languages in South Africa, different cosmologies, different ways of seeing what on earth this reality is. And so it was special, and I didn't quite realize how special it was until I left it. So I did go on this journey myself at age 17. I didn't feel like I could be content unless I knew what was out there. So at 17, I embarked on this series of adventures into different countries, living and working like 24 different countries, just trying to experience what on earth this thing called life is. And then I discovered some really interesting territory in my own mind. I was in San Francisco at age 22, and I'd been smoking weed until I was 22 years old and started like 16. So for about 6 years, I'd been smoking weed. But this time, it unlocked some sort of epigenetic predisposition I have towards bipolar, or call it spiritual gifting or whatever it is. And it sent me into some deep and dark and rich and treacherous terrain. And so the most interesting place I've ever explored was the territory of my own mind. It completely shifted the way that I saw everything. Everything that I thought was mythology, like the biblical worldview and mysticism and all that kind of stuff, sprung to life. And I was able to objectively verify it too. Like I was able to look into my brother's eyes and I knew what he was thinking. I knew when the birds were going to fly past. I knew all of these things that in the reductionist materialist worldview I couldn't have known. And so that shattered my mind. It blew my mind. I didn't know these kinds of things were possible. And so it launched me on a passionate research spree for the next 10 years, basically. I read everything I could on lucid dreaming and mystical experience, and I read the Bible cover to cover, proceeded to read the New Testament through like 7 times in the next 6 months. And I discovered that these states of consciousness are more common than I would have thought, and that so many of the world's mystical traditions have these altered states of consciousness, which do come with these different kind of clairvoyant or psychic abilities. And that was game-changing for me. It made reality rich. Everything was filled with life and brimming with information. And so I thought, I've discovered it all. I've discovered a little taste of enlightenment. Turns out not so much, man. And so a year later, I was back in South Africa with my buddies and still smoking weed. But this time I had a darker experience on weed. I was in a nightclub in Cape Town. And when I opened this kind of portal, I've discovered the mind can be a bit of a portal to this other dimension of consciousness. These other voices or kind of downloads came in that had a darker hue to them. And I was like, well, I guess if the light exists, then the darkness exists too. And that freaked me out. So I stopped smoking weed for 8 years, moved to the land of the free and the home of the brave. I had met my wife in a karaoke bar in Ocean Beach. We had one daughter already, and our second daughter was on the way. I'd studied this stuff. I got my bachelor's in psychology from the University of South Africa. And then I was busy getting my master's degree in theology, the science of God, from Fuller Theological Seminary, when I discovered, okay, I think I could try smoking weed one more time. And within seminary, I drove up to the mountains of Crestline and once more pierced through the veil of reality. But this time I fell so far down Alice's rabbit hole that I didn't come out for a month and a half, despite not touching weed again. Up was down and down was up. And talk about the collapse of duality, and everything was one thing, and I was everybody. We were all one consciousness experiencing itself from different angles. I really got immersed into this ocean of experience that started carrying me on its currents. But I also started drowning in that ocean. They promptly arrested me because they thought I was on LSD, which I wasn't. I was having a manic experience. But it led to the people with disabilities that I was being paid to look after being taken from our home. I got a criminal record. So it really also shattered the life that I'd been building up until that point. It also reinvigorated my fascination with the mind and with spirituality and with deep and authentic connection, because I was building these connections and following these synchronicities that had a life and a mind of their own, and that were giving me a lot of objective evidence that I was onto stuff too. Like my brother said that I was reading his mind verbatim, word for word. I was able to predict something that was going to happen, that people saw happen. I told one of my best buddies something that he did when he was 11 years old that he had never told me before. He was like, dude, how did you know that? And when I was in a jail cell, my cellmate was trying to call his girlfriend with his one call, and it wasn't going through. And I was like, change that last digit from a 3 to a 2. And he did, and it worked, and it went through. So I knew it wasn't completely in my mind. It wasn't completely a malfunction of my consciousness, but I was also making a lot of mess. So long story short, I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to have to deal with navigating all of this, and including the depressive aspects, because I had those euphoric aspects, but then after being put on heavy psychiatric medication and then coming off too quickly, it thrust me into a deep depression, like the worst time of my life, man, where there was just no meaning and purpose. Everything was black and white and dull. I was like, if I'm going to have to learn to navigate this, I might as well get paid to do it. So I just Googled biggest mental health name in the field. NAMI popped up, and they happened to have a job in San Diego as a peer support specialist. So I came to San Diego, man, started surfing again. Living in LA was tricky because it was like an hour and a half one way to get to the surf. And becoming a peer support specialist and navigating that whole terrain in some way redeemed everything that I'd been through. All the mess of the 6 involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations and my 2 arrests and causing such personal havoc, all of that was able to be used in service of coming alongside others and walking with them in their journey. So I discovered this whole new way of understanding these mental health experiences, a whole sort of multidimensional take on what reality is, what the mind is. It's very countercultural. And that's led to the development of my curriculum, Neurodiversity Gifts. Initially, so I'd been working for NAMI for like 5-6 years at this point, and they're like, hey, would you want to present at this Mental Health America conference? You can present on anything you want. I was like, well, all right, then I will. And I started to share some of these different angles from cultural anthropology and spirituality and Greek philosophy on describing what these mental health conditions might be beyond reductive materialism. And apparently the audience loved it. UCSD was there, and they reached out to me. They're like, we're studying this stuff, man. Why don't we team up and bounce ideas? And it led to this group curriculum that I now run in 6 different facilities in San Diego. It's allowed me to travel across the country and present at different conferences. Mm-hmm. It's endorsed by the National Empowerment Center. They flew out from the East Coast to come and film it. NAMI as well has endorsed it themselves. And so now I get to live this. And it's not only just a career, it's a whole different way of being in the world, a whole different way of seeing the mind, the nature of reality. It's been transformative, and it lands me in awesome rooms like this with vibrant minds like yours, man. And it's a real gift. It's a gift that keeps on giving.
Beautiful introduction.
Thanks,
amazing.
Man. There's a lot to say.
There is. Yeah. It's a great story. And
thanks,
we'll unpack more about the worldview that I think you're starting to pull on that's different from reductive materialism.
Yeah.
But it's, one person could listen to all that and go, okay, I hope you don't take offense to what I'm about to say, but look, some bipolar kook, is right. Just went on these crazy trips and thinks he has clairvoyance and all these magical abilities. But the weird thing is that other people feel it too.
Yeah.
And it's that, how you said it, it doesn't seem like it's just in your mind. You've had experiences, and now other people are responding to it in a way that would be abnormal, as if it was just some disconnect from the world.
Yeah.
But instead, it seems to be tapping into something. And I think most people listening to this in one way or another can connect to some of these ideas, that there is something beyond the worldview that we're told is true.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about my experience
Please.
with this from a completely different angle. And then I want to unpack that worldview, reductive materialism, a little bit.
Yeah.
And just to keep our viewers on board with the journey we're about to go on, we're going to land at a place where hopefully we can see how important this is to mental health, because that's really your passion, I see, is what you're doing now. And I think how important the worldview is to mental health, the people who live in the world now, and how much if the water that you're born in is not nourishing, if the space you're born in isn't nourishing to you, how damaging that can be. So, but just really quick, I remember being 18 and starting to just get really into philosophy and trying to understand some of these bigger questions. Really, the meaning of life was the thing that stuck with me, and like trying to just unpack that. Kind of, I think, just an average, if you have an intellectual bent, to just start to question that stuff and try to figure it out. So for me, it hit. But I started to, the way I've put it is I've come in the back door, in the sense of I haven't had, not right away at least, any kind of experience that broke my worldview. Say like when you started smoking weed, and then all of a sudden having these kind of these breaks in your reality, and things started happening. You're like, oh my God, there's so much more to the world than what I've been told. Something like that. For me, it was starting to understand issues in the scientific worldview from just a very much like a logical standpoint of looking at scientific materialism and understanding how is it that we derive morals and value from science alone. Things like this started to break in. And then, myth and narrative are really important. The cultural grammar that we grow up in decides so much about how we even perceive reality. Things like that started to really enter my mind. And I remember hiking in a forest one day and just thinking, this isn't the space that I'm told it is by science. It's not just this this dead world that can be calculated by ones and zeros, but there's actually something living and breathing here that's bigger than me. It was just that feeling of connection to nature.
Wow.
Right? But compounded with my philosophy of, wait a minute, I don't think the worldview I've been given, which is a scientific materialist worldview, captures it all. Anyway, I want to throw it back at you and ask you to maybe unpack or talk a little bit about what we mean by reductive materialism, scientific materialism, what those terms mean, how it traps us maybe in too small of a box, and that there might be stuff beyond that.
100%. I mean, that forest example is perfect, because you could say, no, dude, it's just trees, and the trees are just made of atoms, and, well, there is a little organism there, but it's just driven by kind of like blind survival of the fittest. It's trying to kill the other organisms. But you sense something more than that. You sense a gestalt, something much larger, and it communicates with you, and it changes your consciousness, which is, it shows you how we're part of this ecosystem. So that environment then changes your consciousness, and then you bring that back into the city, and that changes things around here. We know that there's something larger going on, and 99.9% of all civilization throughout humanity's history has known that. And so, we went through the age of the Enlightenment, ironically enough, where we separated spirit from matter. And maybe it's a valid stage. We needed to go through that. But in doing that, we cut out all of the things that get us up in the morning, that bring us meaning and purpose. It's like, if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. Well, can you use a ruler to measure the beauty in a painting? We're using the wrong tool. And it's kind of assuming, reductive materialism assumes that our current tools that we have, they are complete. Like, they measure everything that needs to be measured, and we haven't discovered anything that they can't measure, which is just not good science, because good science is always trying to evolve itself and trying to change its worldview. If we think about with Galileo, the science at the time was saying, well, it's just obvious that it looks like the sun's going around the earth. Look at it. But Galileo is saying, yeah, but when you zoom out, the sum of all these multidisciplinary fields in mathematics shows that there might be a completely different way of viewing this. In fact, the opposite way of viewing it. And it was only like 100 years ago or something that they offered him an apology. So the good science is always evolving. And I think you sense something in that forest there that science hasn't been able to quite capture in a test tube, but it's so real that now it's coming up in this conversation. It's affecting your life. It's affecting the decisions you make and the trajectory that your career takes and all that kind of stuff. So I think that the pendulum swung too far away from an enchanted worldview with reductive materialism, and now it's trying to find some sort of balance. Maybe we're not going back towards like every doorknob is inhabited by a demon, or like this sort of animism in other cultures, but we are recognizing they were onto something, and we're like remembering and reappreciating some of the wisdom of other cultures and other time periods, and integrating them into a current framework about what the mind is, what the human condition is, in a way that I think is going to enrich everything. And so I think it's a cool time to be alive, and a cool time to be involved in the mental health field, and the cool time to be studying and engaged in the pursuits that you're in. And it's going to take on a life of its own. I think it probably already is.
Yeah. And it is exciting. One of, I think, the markers that we can point to see this is people are calling it like the psychedelic renaissance.
Yeah.
Right. And you see it in the mental health field. UCSD is studying it. I mean, John Hopkins, so many universities, but are looking into the seeming power of psychedelics, something like that. Maybe not noticing the dark side of them too, which is an interesting conversation that you kind of touched on with your experience with substances. But that there's something there to breaking out of our worldview, and psychedelics helps us get there. There might be other practices too that we can talk about, but the importance of that. And maybe we can talk a little bit now about in your curriculum, which we'll get to and we can unpack. Actually, first let's start there. I want to hear a bit more just about the curriculum you've developed that you use at different mental health organizations around here to kind of deliver this material. Like, who are you talking to about this kind of stuff, and what effect is it having, and like what's the content a little bit of the stuff you're talking about?
Yeah, good stuff, man. And it's what I've discovered has transformed my own worldview. So like in having to try to go through having a bipolar diagnosis, and they're like, oh, sorry, it's a lifelong disability. You may want to lower your expectations about what's possible. when you believe that, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then life started being empty and void and dull. And when I started to discover all of these other paradigms, which are ancient, it's actually nothing new. It's just a remembering of what came before. The Greeks have a word, anamnesis, which is the opposite of amnesia. It's like a remembering on an existential scale, where everything sort of comes back together and starts to make sense. And so I just started looking into all of these other disciplines through the lens of mental health and discovering they've been saying this kind of stuff all along. So the curriculum takes 7 different modules and unpacks in the format of the hero's journey how these modules can reframe our worldview. So starting in the world that we think that we know, the West, we start with module number 1, which is neurodiversity in the West, exploring the origin of the word neurodiversity, some of the geniuses and game changers, including Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, Carl Jung, who had these mental health conditions, but were able to access something beyond what society could currently understand. Then in module number 2, we talk about quantum physics and the science of mind. What if the brain is more of a filter of consciousness rather than the producer of it? Some brilliant minds believe that all of this is mind, and that actually mind is what's creating matter and not vice versa. That's a paradigm shift, because if the brain is more like a radio picking up on certain signals, it would make sense that certain radios are tuned to different frequencies. It doesn't mean that those frequencies don't exist just because other people can't hear them. And there can be real insights to be tapped into from those channels. In module number 3 is Carl Jung and his depth psychology, discovering that the subconscious world is actually a storehouse of treasures, that all sorts of inventions have come up throughout the years. And that Carl Jung himself discovered these things through going through what we would consider psychosis. And not only that, but we're all connected to something deeper, the collective unconscious. There's something that unites humanity. We maybe came from this unity, and I see it a little bit in South Africa still. There's this unity. We're on this adventure in individuality, but we're coming back towards this unity. And so Carl Jung's module teaches us that we're part of this collective unconscious that's present right now.
If you don't mind, I think it's such a cool story and we could grow on it, unpack Carl Jung's experience, because he's a grandfather in psychology. He's a towering figure who I don't think's touched enough on in psychology curriculum. I've been through so many classes and it's Freud, and right. Also a towering figure, but Jung is up there with how much he's impacted the entire field, especially if you're going into therapy, the way we view some of this stuff. Anyway, to think that you said he himself was neurodiverse. Yep. And he had quite a crazy experience.
Yep, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that had collective implications, you could say. So I want to hear you unpack it a little bit, his story. Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you're talking about the forest. Jung also sensed there was something larger. And so he would do weird things, man. As a kid, even from a young age, he would go into the forest and collect mud from this side of the river, turn it into a little figurine, go up into his attic and lock it in a box. Mm-hmm. And he didn't quite know why. There's this kind of driving force in the unconscious that was driving him to do things that he didn't quite know why he was doing them. And he heard from spirit guides at a young age, so he was definitely more out of the box. But he could stick to the conventional models as well, and he could have one foot in this world. Became a psychiatrist, started working with Freud. They connected so much in the beginning. They spoke nonstop for 8 hours straight. They were really both on a similar kind of frequency, until they diverged. And Freud, famous for writing books on atheism, believed that the mind is sort of like an iceberg that floats in the ocean, and the vast majority is unconscious, but it's not tethered to anything beneath an iceberg, just kind of bobs around. Jung was like, Freud, you're kind of right about that, but we're more like islands that, yes, the vast majority is underwater, it's unconscious, but on the deepest level of islands is the earth.
Beautiful.
Is bedrock, man, and it connects us. And when consciousness shifts, whether it's from traveling or from these practices that you alluded to, or walks in the forest, the water can go out and you can see how you can walk from island to island. We can connect between each other and between the ecosystem that we're a part of. So Jung knew that this was the case because of his own lived experience. And so at age 38, he was, quote, menaced by a psychosis. He was cruising on a train to ironically deliver a lecture on schizophrenia when suddenly things shifted. He saw blood coming down from the mountains around him. And he just was like trying to maintain his composure, which he did manage to do. In hindsight, he saw that was a coming premonition of world war. And so when he saw literal blood, often these things can be symbolic. It's like stepping into the dreamscape. It's stepping into a symbolic world which we've lost. You discovered the power of myth again. So Jung went science, but he discovered the power of myth. And so he was able to now start to integrate that into his materials. He was hearing voices. He was seeing visions. He had to like kind of shut himself up in his house for a while. But in going through that himself, he discovered all of these things that he couldn't have known without connecting to his unconscious mind. He was able to use this technique called active imagination, where he just went into his mind and was guided by these kind of figures, these archetypal figures, to say, knock on the door of a house, and the owner of that house would give him a manuscript. In his imagination, he would read that manuscript, wake up, write it down, and it turned out that was absolutely true. He had information there that was externally verified, that he couldn't have known himself. So Jung's lived experience really flavored and kind of brought back the mythical element into psychology, which is where I think we've gone too far away from. And I think we need to bring some of that back. We tend to think, oh, but myth is just your imagination. And imagination is not real. That's why, like in school, pay attention, stop daydreaming. And yet everything that we see around us, everything first existed in someone's imagination. That computer, this desk, it was all someone's idea before it became into matter. And so I think imagination can be the birthplace of this reality as we have it. And by Jung tapping into his imagination, he was able to give birth to these new ways of psychology, which have really nuanced the field. And for example, Joseph Campbell, who coined the hero's journey, he was a big fan of Jung and studied Jung. So module number 3 really goes into his story because it brings back this fresh element that I think our worldview is missing. And something you discovered as well, that we need this kind of like right-brained, holistic element as well.
Yeah. And the first time I came across that metaphor of the iceberg versus the island, I've always seen the picture in class of the iceberg, but it's a beautiful way to understand, I think, the split between Freud and Jung, and understand the bigger picture that Jung had in mind of a collective consciousness. And how important I think that is when trying to understand these mental health issues that are talked about today. So how impactful has this been? That's kind of the next piece, is like, this is like a pretty revolutionary way in our worldview to approach. I mean, you're talking to people who schizophrenia, bipolar 1, right? Some pretty considered very severe mental health diagnoses. And you're telling them this stuff. And I want to hear the feedback and what they think about it. But first, too, I don't want to pass up on this quote, which I think is one of my favorite quotes you've introduced me to, by Joseph Campbell. And it connects to exactly what you were talking about with Jung. Like, how is it that Jung seems to have the same experiences or symptoms that someone with bipolar 1 is having, right? He's also neurodiverse, but one is living on the streets, say, while Jung is touted as one of the greatest figures of psychology. And you see this throughout history, not just Jung, but like you said, Nikola Tesla, Einstein. Like, we're seeing this in all. So there's some thread here, and I think this quote captures it. It's by Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey guy. It says, "The psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight."
It's got to be one of my all-time favorite quotes, dude.
Yeah. And it's good. It's a cool idea. To see that. Well, can you unpack that a little bit? Yeah,
well, let's think about that. Water. Okay, so water is really dangerous if you can't swim. You could drop a baby in water, it's not going to go well. If we are amateur surfers and we paddle out at Pipeline in Hawaii, you're going to get smashed, man. Water can be dangerous. Water can be lethal if we can't swim in it. And we can learn to swim in it. And when we do learn to swim in it, we can tap into a world that we only saw from the surface. We can go deep down and explore all of these new landscapes. We can learn to ride those waves, those same ones that are so destructive and that can take us down. We can learn to surf those, get in the middle of it, get into the barrel, and come out of the barrel with a refreshed perspective. We can go down and bring up these buried treasures that humanity's forgotten when we learn how to swim. So the person in psychosis is drowning in the mystical terrain. It's the spiritual world. But no one teaches us how to navigate that.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have had any classes in how to navigate the mystical terrain.
No.
No, bro. Like,
And if I can add to the metaphor, what you think of this is like maybe what antipsychotic is doing is, to some extent, it's making that water, that surface level thing that we're always above most of the time for the average person, but the person with bipolar 1, schizophrenia, some kind of psychosis is sinking below it and drowning. What it's doing is maybe giving some kind of artificial boundary on top of the water. So it's like, here, you can now stand above the water completely, something like that. But in the metaphor, I'm thinking that world is dead. Without the water, if you cut off access to the water completely, your roots can't grow, something like that.
Right,
I don't know
nice. I love that.
if you think that's accurate, but you mentioned how deadening the world is on an antipsychotic. And how maybe the better path from a mental health perspective is helping teach and how can people learn to swim and traverse this landscape that can easily be overwhelming and extremely dangerous, like you mentioned. And that's in your curriculum too. So I want to hear more about that.
How do we teach people how to swim and to tap into this water, this nourishment, man? Because we die without water. Our body's composed of that. So if we're cutting off people from meaning and purpose, you're cutting off that lifeblood. We're beings of meaning and purpose. We're narrative beings. We're story-making beings. So if you say, no, anything subjective is just not real, it's like, well, you're cutting off your own lifeblood. We have to connect people to this water. The word psychosis and psyche, their etymology actually means soul, life, breath. We need this breath of fresh air. So I love how you say that the antipsychotics, maybe, for good cause at certain points, cut people off from drowning in that water. They put some sort of a barrier so they're standing up there. But if the goal is to keep them up there, it's like a fish out of water. It's not going to go well, man. We're going to start to dry off. We're going to start to get crusty. We're going to start to lose that vitality that we have. And so if we can, instead of doing that, rather give them water wings, like little flotation devices that allow them to still chill in that water a little bit, get their feet wet, keep the temperature right, and slowly learn how to swim, then eventually you can lower the air in those flotation devices and those water wings by providing them with more community supports and these practices and these worldviews so that they can swim. Beautiful. And as they swim, they go down and they extract these treasures they can then bring up for humanity and enrich the whole culture. Because it's not just for people in mental health. Like, everyone's got a mind, and everyone's swimming in this consumeristic and capitalist and dry reductive materialism where it's like, well, what's the meaning? Just to keep up with the Joneses. I think that the mental health adventure is more of a human venture, and that the neurodiverse can be the ones who bring up these treasures and connect us to that. And so that's what people are discovering from the curriculum. Firstly, we've got to show them there can be some meaning in what you've been through, that you're not completely broken and unfixable, but you have a meaning and a purpose. You're here for purpose, on purpose. And then how do you go about navigating them? How do you keep yourself safe through practices of community and biopsychosocial spiritual interventions that can allow you to gravitate this and connect to something much larger than yourself? I think we're all craving being connected to that larger thing. And so people love the curriculum because it's a complete reframe. And not only people going through it, but clinicians as well. I do like clinician events and I do public speaking at conferences and things like that. And they can't get enough of it because it's not only, they recognize it's not only for the mental health population, but it's a reframing of our worldview at large. And we're thirsty, man. The world needs this kind of meaning and purpose. And this can be one of the vehicles that it can come back through.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Amazing. And I think you touched on something really important there about how this transcends way beyond just a certain population that might have a special disposition to being in those waters more than the average person. But, and you grew on my metaphor around the antipsychotics, and I think that's good because I think a lot of what therapy does, which is important, is coping mechanisms for the current state of your symptom. You're suffering somehow. And I think something I love about your curriculum is how it touches at the deepest level of what I think is affecting most people, which is the worldview. Right? The worldview that we've been given. It's very hard to sustain yourself in the modern world. And I think as therapists, a lot of what we offer are coping skills for dealing with the symptoms that come up from that, all the way from psychosis to just like anxiety and mood disorders, things like that, right? Depression. So I think, okay, great coping skills, but this other option to cause a paradigm shift.
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
And people's worldview.
Yeah.
Which has always been a part from the beginning of therapy's mission as well. Again, looking back at Jung, like this is part of the journey as well, as how can we cause insight in people? That's still taught too, is how that's the job of a therapist in many ways, is help people reach insight and, oh my God, I didn't see that before, right? And I think when we're talking about insight at the level of worldview, it's a complete metanoia.
It's a metanoia, man, a transformation, complete shifting, a metamorphosis into a different mode of being in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, that shift is important. So we've touched a good amount on your curriculum, but specifically to this paradigm shift, is it mostly through psychoeducation? Meaning lecturing on this content, having people understand it. Is there any experiential practices you take people through or that you recommend? Like, how is it that you can lead people? And I'm genuinely asking this question because this is the journey I'm on, is someone who's very much far above the water, but knows that this is not sustaining me. Okay, what do I take a mushroom? Do I smoke weed? Like, how is it that I feel the realness of the world again, but have it be something that can sustain my life, not something that I'm drowning in, which can so often happen, which is what I've experienced with psychedelics, right? But more something that I can start to swim in and to feel alive in. So how is it that you can bring somebody back out of this worldview? And that's a tough question. It's the journey you're on. Yeah. What nuggets have you found?
Yeah, I found some little nuggets, man. And it's the journey that you're still contributing nuggets to. Like even in this conversation, I pick up little nuggets, and it's just a way of life. It's a way of being in the world that shows you that it's all around you if you just have the eyes to see. So firstly, to touch on the psychedelics, I don't smoke weed at all anymore, and I've never done any harder psychedelics because the neurodiverse tend to gravitate close towards this unseen dimension naturally. And so a little push from psychedelics can send us so far into that other dimension that it's hard to come out. So like even in the studies at UCLA and Johns Hopkins and those who are studying psilocybin and LSD, they don't give these trials to people who are on the psychosis spectrum because they recognize that people can knock them back. But it's not the substance itself that induces this catalyst, or at least the lasting change of this paradigm shift. It's a mystical experience. Or at least in the psilocybin studies, what they've discovered, it's the medicine of mysticism. People need to have the veil pulled back so they can see, wait a minute, dude, I'm part of something so much larger. It's that remembering on an existential scale that we spoke about. So whereas psychedelics can catalyze that in people, it also maybe comes at a price because you're teleporting into this other dimension that is inhabited by both benevolent and malevolent beings. And so you're hoping that like you find yourself in a good neighborhood there. There's also ways to tap into these states of consciousness completely naturally, as we've known for thousands of years. Like all human cultures and spiritual traditions have this mystical component. And like within even the major world religions, so within Catholicism, there's a huge mystical component. You just have to kind of knock on the right doors of the right thinkers. Within Judaism, there's Kabbalah. Within Islam, there's the Sufis. There's this dimension of life and experience that's waiting for us if we just start looking. So you've started to look. And so when you seek, you will find. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually, we have it within us. Even, for example, dimethyltryptamine, the active ingredient in ayahuasca, we have that endogenously, and it's hypothesized by Rick Strassman and others that we produce it in our pineal gland and that we produce it in dreaming states and at birth and at death. And so if we can learn to harness the biochemical factory that is our own body, we can tap into these states of consciousness completely sober, which I believe is the only safe way to access these dimensions, mm-hmm. because they're powerful. They're so much bigger than us. So you talk about practices. I think that there are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual practices that we can tap into. And throughout the whole curriculum, everyone has activities and exercises and practices. And being in a group that's talking about these kinds of things itself is the practice. Like almost every time, man, we experience this liminal state. There's something larger than the sum of our parts that's come into the room. And you can even sense it in conversations like this. There's something that we're both feeding into, and then it's feeding into us, and it's inspiring us. So being around like-minded people is a huge deal. That's the psychological and the social component of it. But biologically, I think it's a lot about what we eat and focusing on maximizing kind of your awareness and your consciousness, and exercise, surfing for me, of course. Biological is also sunlight and nature, walking in the forest, having quiet, being with your own thoughts. Psychological, it is reframing these kinds of ideas. And so you have to believe something before you're going to experience it. So one of the church fathers said that faith isn't a way of understanding that then leads to believing. It's a way of believing that then leads to understanding. When you believe that something's possible, lo and behold, it becomes possible. It's like they did a study with a group of cats that were raised with all horizontal lines. And the cats, when they grew up, then couldn't see horizontal lines anymore. They could only see vertical lines. If you don't know that something's possible, you're just not going to see it. You actually filter it out, like we're filtering out the vast majority of stimuli right now. So psychologically reframing what the mind is, what the nature of reality is, being open to these possibilities brings in a kind of faith that then actually shows you. Beautiful. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Biological, psychological, social is connecting to the right people and being authentic too, and dropping those masks. The word personality comes from the Latin persona, which is this mask that we wear. When we drop the mask, we can really see into each other again. We can breathe properly again. We can let the light come in and shine off our face. So I think there are pockets of communities that are super authentic, especially in the mental health space and in the recovery space. People have kind of reached the edge of themselves, and when you've reached rock bottom, what's the point of trying to fake it anymore? So there's a lot of people being very real within those communities, and that's game changing, because we're not meant to do this all by ourselves like icebergs floating around. We're meant to be connected to other islands. So bio, psychosocial, and then finally spiritually, there's all sorts of spiritual practices, contemplative practices, mystical experiences from all sorts of world traditions. My favorite is the Christian mystical tradition, because like I've seen it, man. I've seen that it's absolutely transformative. It induces this metanoia. And so there's things like Lectio Divina, which is sacred imagination, reading the Bible while watching your imagination, and it takes on a life of its own. It's sort of a Christian version of Carl Jung's active imagination. There's also like monastic rhythms, being in tune with the seasons and with the cycles of nature, all sorts of things that I think we could bring in a neo-monasticism into our time, and we could start to re-bring those practices that we've forgotten back into a transformative spiritual experience. So those are some of the kind of categories. Obviously, there's specific practices within the curriculum, but I mean, you as well, man, like you've experienced these kinds of things. What are some of the things that induce the state of consciousness the most for you besides walking in a forest?
Well, yeah, I want to go there with you into some territory that I think is not talked about enough in mental health, that plays a big role in people's lives, and that's the spiritual dimension of all this, which, and the religious dimension, because it connects to the social piece too.
Absolutely,
is a big one, and that's the domain I've been exploring the most as something that can try to both. So to touch on it, more spiritual and social, I think together form something like a religion, right? And there's tradition, there, right? It's not some isolated practice, taking mushrooms in a forest, that maybe could be considered spiritual, right? It's opening you up to this other dimension.
Yeah.
But I think what makes it religious is the roots and tradition that's trying to ground you.
Yeah.
And how important do you think that is when we're talking about the psychotic drowning versus the mystic swimming? How important is tradition and a social group and cohesion to exploring this territory, and like where can we find that?
So good, man. We could talk for ages on that. Oh, I love that. Yeah, because it ties back into this worldview. Like I think what we've kind of come to the conclusion of in the West is that it's us, it's our spiritual experience, it's whatever works for us, and it's about my subjective encounter with God and in whatever that means to me. So there's advantages in individualism, and of course the West has made huge leaps and bounds in science and other things. But individualism forgets that the whole reason we're doing this is because it's part of this larger collective. We're connected, but like these islands. And so when we have these spiritual experiences where we just go off and we're living in this other domain, or even we're like wandering the streets of Carlsbad, just talking to ourselves, we're having a grand old time, but it's not actually benefiting humanity. I think that is in a way drowning in that water that the mystics swim in with delight. I think we need a community, we need spiritual practices, we need to be grounded. That's the difference between Freud's model and Jung's model, is that the island is grounded. It's connected to something larger that comes before it. And I think that we've kind of let individualism have its run. It's like it's been great to gratify all of your senses, any whim that comes to mind, but then you find yourself a slave to your own impulses. We think freedom is just doing whatever we want and having whatever we want, but then you're actually a slave to your own impulses. What I've discovered in this new worldview is that it's so paradoxical. It's so countercultural. It's in dying to yourself that then you're able to live to something larger for the first time. It's in when your ego is weak, that's when you're tapping into real strength. And so that is, I think, the most powerful reframing for mental health as well, because it's been so much about self-help and about your experiences. Psychedelics by nature, I know you're going to sometimes do it in a group context and you'll have like a shared experience, but a lot of it is your experience that you're going to go on these terrains. But we were never designed. The whole world has been set up so that we can't see everything without each other. For example, I can see the room behind you right now, and you can see the room behind me that I can't see, and you can't see the room behind you. We need each other to be able to see the whole picture, and we need each other to be able to rescue each other from drowning. And so I think when these experiences are taken out of the community context in which they grew up in, it gets twisted, which is what the Satan, the accuser, does, is take something that's good and just add a little twist to it. But what about using it for your power, which is the test that both Jesus and Buddha went through as they were waking up, as they were getting this power. It was like, are you going to use it for yourself, for your grandeur, to rule the world, to keep your kingdom? Or are you going to die to yourself so that you can live for something larger? And both of them passed the test. But I think in our age, we're not even taught that that is a test. And so we're disconnected from all the sacred traditions of the past. And yeah, they can change. It's the same body, but we could bring fresh 2026 clothing and like dress these kind of practices up. But I still think that religion and that community is vital and missing. You ask, where can we get it? I don't know, dude. Like, I'm trying to create it. And I do it. I have a couple of groups where I create that. And that's kind of where I feel God steering me into the future, is to create a tangible and a digital representation of that community, because then it takes on a life of its own. And it's the work of God that's busy guiding the steps, rather than our egos or capitalism or something like that. So I think that's what's up. And how have you found it? How have you found it within religion and spirituality? How have those been able to connect?
I think probably for me the biggest things have been community and prayer. And we can talk about prayer a little bit more. Actually, I'd like your insight around that. We can think a bit about meditation, or mindfulness is offered in therapy quite a bit, and prayer has a lot of taboo around it. And for me as well, growing up, I struggled with prayer for quite a while. What does it mean? Like, I'm petitioning to God to get a new surfboard. Like, what is this? And so maybe we can even go down that rabbit hole a little bit. But I also, Carl Jung has this quote that I really like around religion, and saying the point of religion is to stop people from having religious experience. And confused me for a while, but what I've taken away from that like paradoxical quote is, religious experience can be overwhelming for people, and it can be disruptive for the individual and for society when everyone has their own individual dream of what reality is, or something like that, or there's no cohesion between these experiences. I think religion serves as some kind of filtration. It's like when you're talking about the cat who is raised to only see certain lines. Like we're raised in a context, and it closes the world off and only allows us to see so much, right? We're looking through like this cavern and just trying to make out things that are there. And I think religion's trying to serve potentially at its best is some kind of organizational structure that can funnel in those religious experiences and hold them properly in communion, in community. Something like that. But so that's really where I'm searching. But I want to not also lose the thread before we go down, maybe talking about meditation, prayer, and other practices that people use to try to access this space. This can feel maybe lofty in the mental health space a little bit, I think, like something that, at least in the worlds I inhabit in social work, like you're talking about meaning and purpose. There's people starving on the streets and homeless. That's who we're trying to help. It can feel very disconnected. And I have the inkling that this is vital to even the most basic needs.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a few ways to understand that and make that argument. One of them maybe is around attachment and connection. And I think what meaning is fundamentally is it's about connection. Connection to ourselves, connection to others, and connection to the world. Proper connection. Like you're talking about Jung with these islands. That metaphor is beautiful. And when people become isolated, basic needs arise. But when we're first born, we're attached by an umbilical cord, and then we are attached to our mom and getting nutrition from her. Like attachment is everything, and we know that from psychology literature. And I think meaning has a lot to do with, in this world we're talking about, has a lot to do with proper homing and proper connection to the world. So I don't want it to be thought about as some lofty thing that only people that have a certain level of income can start thinking about. You know? I think even Maslow at the end of his career started to realize how important this stuff was, even at the most basic level. Or I should say the most foundational level. And another thing is spiritual experiences aren't uncommon, or some small part of the population has it. If you look it up, the literature is that, it's thought that over 50% of people have spiritual experiences. And I've talked to some of the most hardcore atheists I know, and even they will say, well, yeah, I've had some things I cannot explain. I was paragliding, and all of a sudden just the world opened up before me, and I felt like this tiny, just both insignificant but like cosmically connected thing to this giant world. Like people feel that their paradigms are broken, but I think we're given a worldview that deadens it so quickly. But yeah, so I don't know if you have anything on your mind to grow off of that. If not, I can hit you with a question.
No, I do. I was thinking the astronaut overview effect, like how these astronauts, these scientists, when they leave the world and they see the interconnection of it all, they come back a different person. They have this sort of experience on the edge of self. And as you were talking, I was also thinking about Maslow's hierarchy. So yeah, for those who don't know, Maslow has this hierarchy, which in my psychology textbook ended at self-actualization. After basic needs like safety and self-esteem and love and belonging are met, then there's self-actualization, becoming everything that we can be. But what's lesser known is that Maslow revised his theory and added self-transcendence above self-actualization, that the pinnacle of human flourishing is being connected to something larger, transcending. But if you talk about, is it lofty, is it abstract, we need to be meeting the needs of the homeless and that kind of stuff, in my lived experience, Maslow's hierarchy was flipped on its head. It wasn't getting up and meeting my safety needs that got me out of bed in the morning. It wasn't, I was so excited to have breakfast and meet my nutritional needs that got me out of bed. The reason I didn't want to get out of bed was because I had no meaning and purpose. And when that thing flipped around and it was self-transcendence, being connected to something larger, that was my reason for my self-esteem, for my connection, love and belonging, and for meeting my basic needs and meeting my safety needs. So I think it's much more foundational than we think. It is like, I love your metaphor of the water. We need to be connected to the water, that life force to nourish us, that gives us the energy to do other stuff. If we're beings of meaning and purpose, we're narrative beings. It's like, why do anything? If there's no meaning or purpose, why do anything? And so that's why even people who've climbed their ladders of success and all these celebrities who end up taking their own lives, because it's not about accomplishing yourself, it's being connected to this larger sort of thing. And the word God has this kind of bias within our culture, but God also is the operating system of all of this. God is the ground of being, as Paul Tillich said. God is the screen on which all of this is happening. God can be seen in many different ways, and sometimes we do have to get it out of that religious terminology and that framework. And so whereas religion has been able to hold it, and I think it does a great job of holding it, I also think we can invite people into that container in these different ways that haven't conventionally fit the religious terminology. Maybe it's like a bell-shaped curve in statistics. Most people kind of just want to be told what to do, what not to do, how to get to heaven, and that sort of thing. 67% of people fall within one standard deviation of the mean. But then there's the outliers. Then there's the ones who are deeply seeking the meaning behind it all and these different layers of abstraction. And so I think most of the world religion containers cater for that. It'll meet you wherever you're at. And it needs to do that, because if everyone is busy having mystical experiences, like, nothing would get done. There needs to be a variety of different types of people. And so I still think that the religious containers can provide that ability to tap into the transcendent, make the transcendent immanent, and even bring that meaning and purpose to people on the streets. Like the homeless situation, I don't think throwing more money at it or even more food or any resources is really fixing the deep underlying cause.
Yeah.
The cause is wanting to be connected to something larger, not subscribing to society's mandates about how you should live. And if we could give people that, give them meaning and purpose, that's a reason for them to become active contributors to society.
Mm-hmm.
But our worldview is just kind of shut them out as, well, you're not fitting into the box, therefore let's just keep on throwing box stuff at you. They don't want the box stuff.
Right, yeah. And I mean, I think you're right, and I agree to point to religion as a potential domain that can fix this issue. Because as social workers, we're taught not to just think at a micro level. That's my field, is social work. You look at micro, the individual; meso, the community; and then macro, which is the systemic as a whole. And you're taught to think in systems. And when we're thinking about the individual on the street, for whatever their cause to be there, we need to think at a micro level of what can help them the most. And there's going to be a variety of things, but I don't think we should exclude what you're offering, which is, and what Maslow started to think as well, which is fundamental, which is this need for self-transcendence, going beyond the ego. There's something to live for, and there's something greater you're connected to. I think that's really needed. But I think that same theory can climb the systems, and we can think about it at a systemic level too, about if society is organized in a way that is unified properly under the right domain, it can nourish better. It can better allocate its resources, right? But when we're all in an individualistic mindset, or under the wrong collectivist mindset even, right, it can be extremely poisonous to the individuals involved. So it really transcends all those levels, for sure.
It does. So how do we change it on all of those levels? I mean, we need to change the collective mindset. We need to change the worldview. And now through the internet, it's one of the only times that we've had the possibility of doing that. If we think about how technological advancements normally precede this whole like cognitive shift or this different way of being in the world, like the printing press then allowed the Bible to be printed in native languages and spread out everywhere. That started the Protestant Reformation. Now with the internet, information could be spread everywhere, like instantly, much quicker than the printing press. I think the ground is ripe to bring these new ideas to people, these paradigm shifts to society, so we all collectively start to wake up and say, wait a minute, man, we're all doing this to ourselves. Like, we're doing it to ourselves. Like, I have a 12-year-old who I was just quickly talking about who's in middle school. And part of the reason why it's so hard in middle school is because they're all doing it to each other. If just a few of them stopped doing it, there would at least be some of them being themselves, being real, being okay to be flawed, and that would be an attractive force for all the others. But because all of them continue to subscribe to this narrative, middle school remains a daunting prospect, as it was in my time too. Society is just mutual consensus, like you said, like a mutual dream. If we're here, we drive on the right because we all just agree to. In South Africa, we all drive on the left because we all just agree to, and no one crashes. If we can use information technology and even AI to get these messages out in ways that really reach people and change their lenses of perception, we have a chance to change the world now like never before. Exciting time.
It's really exciting. And we could spend a whole episode on what is making me think, of course, what system, what mechanism are we going to use or tap into to bring about the right collective dream that can sustain all of us? And you can look all over history, and what you see at the beginning of every civilization is religion as the worldview that's trying to build that. Yeah. We've kind of made an argument, or at least talked about why when we cut off from that, right, and we're left with the scientific reductionism, it doesn't feed us properly. But it's not so easy to tap back into just a correct religious worldview. You know, we could spend a whole episode talking about religious institutions and how destructive they've been throughout history too. So it's not enough to just point at religion, but to really understand what that means. And just a little thing about that is religion, the underlying word of it is religio, it's one of the oldest words, but it's thought to mean binding together.
Nice.
Right? And I think that's ultimately what religion's attempting to do is bind us all together.
Yeah.
And so how integral do you say, and how do you introduce this into the field when you're going in and talking to people and leading a group?
Yeah.
What would you say is most central, if there is one, between the bio, psycho, social, and spiritual? Obviously, they're all interconnected and interlinked, but for you, what is the main vessel that you think can carry people?
For me, it's spirituality, man, because my whole lived experience was a complete mystical experience, and my whole everyday reality now is a spiritual experience. And so that comes with a lot of baggage, that word spiritual, and yet it's the thing that excites the most. So, for example, I did a training just before I went to South Africa, literally the day before, of, say, 30 to 40 clinicians. And literally 95.6% of them, every single person except one, loved it and loved the spiritual components and all of this depth. And it's like, this is what we've been craving. And one person pushed back on the religiosity. Mm-hmm. Why are we talking about religion? This seems like there's an agenda behind it. It's like, well, that's because our participants are talking about religion. Hyper-religiosity is just like one of the DSM labels for if you're experiencing these larger levels of purpose. It's been like kind of medicalized and said, oh, if you're thinking about religion a lot, it's just hyper-religious. Let's put that aside. And yet that within my groups and even with clinicians, like I shared, is the thing that I think is the most invigorating to people. And it's this vital experience. It's not dogma. The dogma and the doctrine is just a way of containing or capturing the lived experience. Like it's all derived from a first-hand account. So mysticism means a direct experience of ultimate reality. Very hard to completely have a paradigm shift unless you've experienced it. For example, in neurodiversity gifts, we have these optical illusions. Like you've probably seen the one of, for example, like the duck and the bunny, or the old lady and the young lady. Unless you've seen the other one yourself, people in the room can be talking about the other one as much, and you can, I could kind of see it, but you haven't had that experience of it. Once you've seen it, you can never not see it. You know that it exists. And so I think what we need to do is catalyze an experience of it. And I think one of the best ways, I love that you said religio means binding, is in small little communities where you like minds and hearts meet, and you use some sort of a catalyst to just fuel an organic synergy. It could be the Bible. It could be a sacred text. It could be some sort of an intention of having an experience in nature. But if there's just little pockets of people and that experience comes in and they see that there's something larger that's trying to lead you, it's inspiring you, inspiration, there's this thing coming into you that's from beyond you, then I think that people, once they've seen that, you can't unsee that. And then they'll naturally bring it into all of the different spheres. So how do we foster that? Well, the ancients were pretty good at setting up the parameters to foster that. I think we're so busy in this culture, and it's hard not to be, because you got to pay San Diego rent prices, and you need 2 working incomes just to pay rent. Who's raising the kids? The system is raising the kids. I think we're doing capitalism to each other too, this current form of it. I think capitalism can be good, but we need a capitalism 2.0, a reinvention, so we have time for the things that matter. And so it could start as simple, for anyone listening, you could just gather 2, 3, 4 friends that you have who are interested in these kinds of things, and you could take a walk, a conscious walk in the park, and look at the messages that nature is sending. Why is the light hitting that leaf in that way? How come? What is that intelligence that designed that leaf for maximal photosynthesis? If you just look to nature, you could do that. You could bring out the Bible, the living word, and there's a way of understanding the Bible where it comes to life and it's starting to speak and shape, and you're like, bro, this thing is like, it's an eternal well. It goes as deep as possible. And so just small pockets of community, I think, are probably how it starts. I know we want to like maybe have this mass campaign where it's all like kind of easily digestible and could be for sale on Walmart shelves. But I think the early church started just within small pockets of believers. A lot of these kinds of movements start small. And finally, Margaret Mead said, never think a small group of committed people can't change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has. Mm-hmm. Just a small group, and then that sets fire, and it's contagious.
Beautiful. Yeah, that the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can't just package it and give it to somebody, but it's something they have to experience and see themselves. And I'd say, I think that's in the therapy room, what can be most healing for people is that ability to refresh themselves, break out of an old box and see things anew. And it's another thing that climbs levels too. We can have individual paradigm shifts, we can have them as communities, and we can have them as a whole system, right? Yeah. So like you said, the impact a small group can have when we're talking about paradigm shift, it can explode very quickly. We see it all the time with internet memes and whatever, right? Is it just all of a sudden this little seed has spread? Right. So I think that's something to think about as professionals in the field, but also for individuals of all kinds, is like what kind of seed are you nourishing and growing, and how can you break outside of your current paradigm, try to see the world from a new angle, reinvigorate it. Beautiful.
And it's risky, and you're letting go of the old, and so like you've got to want it too. You've got to be open to it. I mean, sometimes it just smashes you on the side of the head, but often you have to be willing to pursue that. And like I've just come back from a 6-week vacation in South Africa, and there's a vitality or a kind of openness and authenticity that I saw for the first time there that has always been there, but I just didn't see it. And I wonder if it's because their current modes you can't rely on them. Like you can't rely on the income coming in. You can't rely on your safety. Like there's great white sharks in the water, bro. Like life is always kind of on the line. And so that makes you live on the edge of yourself, and you're willing to be open to something new. Whereas sometimes here in America, the system works so well and we're living such great lives and we've got all of these comforts that, well, do I really want to question the foundation that all of this is built on? That might mean giving up all of that. And I kind of like it. And it also says something about like what I've accomplished in my life. So that's why maybe I think the mental health communities and the people who are going through suffering are primed to be able to say yes to something other, because their life has already been shattered. And so you might as well build from scratch with something that's more vital. So what is it going to take to reach everyone in the world? Well, that's an individual thing that they're going to have to be ready to be reached. But we can definitely start with the broken. Maybe this is why the gospel goes out to the least of these and to the broken. It's accepted by the marginalized communities so much, is because there's a hunger and an openness for it. So who better than the mental health community and the homeless populations and the people with substance use issues who are trying to fill that God-shaped hole, to be able to reach them and empower them with their neurodiversity gifts so they can bring that gifts to their communities, and that can set fire from the ground upwards. It's not maybe a top-down thing. Maybe it's a bottom-up thing.
Amazing. It was a great conversation.
Love it, man.
The work you're doing is incredible. It's inspired me as a student still about to graduate and enter the field, you know.
Come on.
It's exciting, and to see what you're doing, the power of changing at the margin and trying to enact these paradigm shifts, and the experience, your own life, your own testimony to it all is beautiful. So you're keeping the fire burning. I love it.
Thanks, man. You bring the water for the fire, which is a perfect balance. You're hydrating. We're bringing the warmth. We got the water and the fire, which is what San Diego has, man. The sun and the water are in a perfectly primed position.
That's right. We'll keep them balanced.
Keeping that balance. Yeah, that's right.
All right. Anything else you wanted to say? And where can people find your work? That's important.
Cool. So you could go to southafricanjosh.com, which will redirect you to inspiredmindmentalhealth.com. That's my company. That's probably the best place to check me out. I'm on YouTube as well. But I think that the website is always living and breathing, and it can be very versatile. So come say hi there. It would be awesome to connect with any of your listeners. Dude, thank you for bringing these conversations into the space, and just for the sharp mind and intellect that you bring to these things, the rootedness and the willingness to even be a little uncomfortable and to live a different kind of life in a way that's going to set fire to, in a good way, to campuses like this and to the San Diego community. So thank you, brother, for bringing me here, and I'm excited for our journey ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, brother.
Awesome.
Yeah.